Should the diversity of your staff reflect the diversity of the community in which you operate? If you think it should, but you struggle to bring diversity and inclusion into your hiring practices, then this episode is going to help you out because my guest today helps private practices diversify their hiring approach and bring more DEI into their staff. I'm Carl White, principal at Market Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that what they usually want, but care is better when the provider owns the practice because that's when they're going to have the most freedom to make the clinical decisions they think are best for you. It's different when somebody else owns the practice because eventually their agenda is going to creep into the provider's ear. It's more for the provider to think about, distracts from other priorities. Let's just keep it private and get rid of all that to begin with. My guest today is Jonathan Bonanno. Jonathan is the principal at Cultura Co, a psychology-based talent agency. Jonathan holds over a decade of healthcare experience working alongside senior leadership and executive teams of reputable Fortune 100 companies and small to mid-size startup businesses in the disciplines of people operations and implementation management. Jonathan has coached over 100 dental offices, operations leaders, and entrepreneurs across the country to become high-performing teams, as well as facilitated the sale of multimillion-dollar practices. He is a certified talent optimization consultant with added certification in social and behavioral research. Jonathan, this is a timely topic to record at least, and thank you for taking some time to come on Practice Care.
Thank you so much, Carl. I'm so honored to be here, so excited to be here to share a little bit about my passions, which is the world of recruiting and hiring.
Yes, and the world needs people who are passionate about the world of recruiting, and and we will get into that. And I said, timely when we record, we're recording this episode in the middle of December 2023, where all sorts of what's breaking loose, and DEI is getting wrapped into the whole thing. Right or wrong, I don't even know, but it just seems like it's spinning a bit out of control. And so when this episode goes live, think about that. Doubt the topic's going to have gone away by then for sure. So it's still going to be timely. Before we get into it, though, Jonathan, I'm going to start. I say this every episode where I start with every guest. Before we get into it, help us understand you. Learn a bit more about you. It's funny. Over your left shoulder, you got Chief Psycho, which is quite funny. So help us get to know you a bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for having me here today, Carl. I hope everyone that's listening is enjoying their holiday season that's upon them.
Yep.
Or that recently was upon them, I should say.
Right.
So a little bit about me. I joined the world of healthcare now close to 14 years ago. And I was actually on the roadmap to become a plastic surgeon. I took all of the nursing prerequisites during school because I wanted to make sure that I had some inkling and understanding of what that clinical endeavor would actually look like for me.
Right.
So graduated from high school as a CNA, went full speed ahead into the nursing program to start that as the first step to pursuing a career as a surgeon.
Wow.
And I quickly realized that odors, scents, bloods, any type of bodily fluids.
Better to find out early.
Yeah, was not my cup of tea. So I actually decided to take a year and a half off of school, and I was raised by my mother, and she was always an advocate for you're either going to school or you're going to work, and you're going to school on top of work. So when I came to her and said, "Oh, right," I came to my mom and I said, I'm not really sure that this is the right path for me. I don't have the right temperament for what this job is going to require. So, and temperament meaning not like anger, temperament meaning I can't do this type of job. And when I realized that, I started focusing on the business side. I had an opportunity to follow some of my mom's peers, some of my mom's leaders, and I was always the kid that was going into the office when my mom was going to work. And my mom works for a large pharmaceutical company. So I always loved the business side of healthcare. But I didn't know that I actually had a love and admiration for it until I really entrenched myself into it. And I started my career back with McKesson for 6.5 years. I then worked with CVS Health as well for a good amount of time. And I really learned all aspects of launching programs, launching staffing organizations, creating patient assistance offerings once the FDA released a new medication. So I worked through every layer of customer service, sales, operations, leadership. anything and everything that I can get my hands on.
Mhm.
I was a sponge. Every 2 years, I was getting a promotion. So by the time I left my position within McKesson, I was in my first senior leadership role at 23, and I was leading and deploying my own programs, which was a ton of fun,
Mhm.
uh, up until it wasn't. And
Yeah.
this is where I started really honing in onto some of those DEI initiatives. Large organization. I'm thankful for the career that I built over there. I've learned as much as I could in such a short amount of time. That really helped propel me into what I'm doing today. But one of the biggest things that really stood out for me, I would have to say, were the lack of values actually being honored. And we had our eye care principles and leadership principles on every wall in the giant organizational building. It was
Mhm.
huge.
Mhm.
But every wall you would walk by, there would be principles and values and quotes and manifestations and all the rawness that
Mhm.
is fun and insightful to have. But when you start working with individuals and you're going up that leadership ladder and you're finding that the higher you go, the more and more less impactful those values begin to be.
Mhm.
And I had a really hard time with that. I'm very empathetic. I'm a people person. I love to be around people. So when that started showing up, that was kind of my white flag, if you will, or red
Mhm.
flag
Yeah.
to say, hey, it's kind of time for something new. It's ready to move
Mhm.
on to your next opportunity. And at the stage that I was in my career at that time, the only change that would really happen would be you're getting another title in front of your existing title. So
Yeah.
job, same everything, more
Yeah.
money, but more
More
stress
work.
on top of
Yeah.
that. Um, so I decided to step away from the corporate world, and I was recruited to a consulting agency located in Phoenix, Arizona. And I stepped in as the chief operating officer, building out the operations and the HR division of the organization while consulting dental practices and dental teams on top of that.
Hmm.
So
So
I
they
brought
were
over
unrelated. The consulting was not related to the. Oh, okay.
completely unrelated. I decided to bring all of my healthcare experience over because the huge initiative that I was focused on was process improvement.
Okay.
So any office, any team that I'd be working with, that's just the hat that I'd put on. I'd
Yeah.
angle it from where are the opportunities here with how
Mhm.
we're communicating, with how we're presenting, with the conversations we're having as a dynamic team. So I really focused on that angle. What do I know that I can do and start making a difference today? Okay, great. Let's focus on that channel.
Right.
But what we realize is not everything is a project, not everything is a task. There are people behind those initiatives and those outcomes that we're anticipating.
Mhm.
In order for me to be able to get to my goal, I needed to best understand the people that were surrounding me and supporting me getting to that goal.
Yeah.
So as you can imagine, stepping into a new organization, I inherited 65 dental-based employees that I had not a lick of knowledge of what they were
Yeah.
doing. So in order for me to be a good leader, I need to step in and understand what it is that they do. So
Mhm.
verifying insurance, presenting treatment plans, making sure that payments are getting posted appropriately. We're submitting the claims to the insurance carriers. Everything from a front office experience perspective, I needed to make sure that not only I understood, but I can take ownership of the outcome there too.
Right.
So during that time, I was doing all of that, learning dentistry, learning the consulting realm. While I was already in a consulting capacity in my corporate career, I was actually in a position to now I was face to face. The Zoom interview or the Zoom recordings, web conferences, I've been doing it for a very long time. This is just now I get to see people.
Right. Right.
So having that opportunity really allowed me to get super excited for work again, allowed me to be responsible for the difference that I wanted to see in an industry that I really was dipping my toes into.
Mhm.
And during that time, we were approaching COVID. So I had joined the consulting firm at the end of 2018, consulted throughout 2019, and then 2020, we made the executive decision to shut down the consulting business. Just we had no
Mhm.
sign of hope, really, honestly.
Okay.
And there was a lot of opportunities that were still showing up. So we pivoted our entire model to a virtual support model where we were supporting administrative functions within dental practices and medical practices. But on top of that, one of the primary clients that we were supporting, which became my mentor, she taught me everything that I needed to know about dentistry, the only exchange to that was I needed to help sell her practice by the end of 2020. So we were
Okay.
able to walk away very happily
Okay.
with that education and understanding. And it was just the best thing that I could say that I walked away from. And in light of that, I actually launched my own business in tandem with starting my doctoral program in IO psychology. So I really helped pull all of those principles of my past experience, my education, my conversations, and my passion as well
Hmm.
to really hone into the world of DEI in all areas it shows up, and specifically for how we're attracting and retaining some of the top talent that lives out there in this beautiful world we get to call home.
Right. And that's been your focus over the past few years.
Yeah, so it's been now nearly six-ish years in dentistry,
Okay.
and
Okay.
solely on those principles.
Okay. This is a large topic. There's no clean, easy way in. So I'm just going to throw the question out there and we'll pick it apart as we go. And the question is, so how do you diversify your hiring approach?
Yeah.
Where do we, I don't know where to start. I'm kind of relying on you for that. And you can start wherever you want. So how do we do this?
Yeah,
As a
absolutely.
private practice, right? So not like Fortune 500, lots of resources, lots of research, lots of time to research things, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've been there too. Private
Yes.
practice, you got 16,000 things on your plate, and this is 16,001. So
Yeah.
how do we do this?
Exactly. And I love that you pointed out the differentiation there, because the full scale recruiting inside of a corporate setting is much, much different when you are wearing 17 other hats in the practice,
Mm-hmm.
up of now being responsible to hire the next talent on your team.
Yeah.
So first off, it's acknowledging that when there's a need. So understanding what the need is to hire first.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about diversity and inclusion, I'm a big advocate for not discussing your team as anything other than a team. So if you're saying your team is a family, or we're this, we're friends, we're all of that and the other, those are great things to have from a interpersonal feeling perspective. But when we start advocating those terms and putting that language out there, it can create a world that doesn't actually show up very diverse. It actually shows very non-diverse. When you say that I'm looking to hire my next team member and they want to come join our rock or be another our rock star, and they want to join our family of rock stars, that actually isolates out how you're perceiving the talent in the pipeline, and actually puts you in a very difficult position to, when somebody's asking for feedback, how you want to bring that or carry that forward.
So is that because a team can be diverse because that's what a team can be, but a family can't because they're all part of the same family? Is that what you mean?
A
Sort
little bit,
of.
a
Okay.
little bit,
Correct me
yeah.
on that. Okay.
Yeah. So with the familial conversation,
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons why I hate that being used as a term is there are a lot of breakdowns that we can naturally have inside of a family. There
Mm-hmm.
are skill sets, there are strengths, there's weaknesses, there's way that we communicate with family members.
Mm-hmm.
Now, different when we're speaking to a team member in the workplace. So when we
Yeah, good.
that
Okay.
conversation up,
Yeah.
that's where you start building those little guardrails around how you're shaping and forming your team.
Mm-hmm.
Because we say we want to bring on a rock star team member that's going to join our family. Well, what does that really look like?
And then you
How
got
does
team and family going together. It's confusing.
It's very confusing. So
Yeah.
that's the first thing I would say is acknowledge that your team is a team and not a family. You can have the family warm, fuzzy feelings as part of your culture,
Mm-hmm.
but let's identify your team members as who they are. Team members advocating together towards a common goal, which is,
Okay.
in this case, your patients, servicing
Yes.
your patients.
Okay.
So diversifying the hiring approach to you requires that extra time. Now, knowing that as an office manager, because that was a role that I played as well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing multiple things in my practice. Now having to be concerned about whether or not I need to replace my receptionist or I need to replace a dental assistant. Those are areas that we don't commonly encounter outside of being in the front office.
Mm-hmm.
So the best way that I've been able to diversify some of those conversations and the way that we identify the type of talent that we're looking for is asking who that person is going to be close in contact with. So if you know that you're going to be replacing your one of your treatment coordinators, but you know you have two sitting up front, well, that's a great opportunity for me as the office manager to sit down with TC and seat two, saying, all right, we need to replace Jonathan because he's in seat one. He's moving on to a great opportunity, whatever the story or narrative is. Now we're focusing on the replacement.
Mm-hmm.
So, Carl, you're in seat two. What would it look like for our next team member to join, and how would they be operating? What are some ways that you would love them to be in this position? Whether that's being open, that's being genuine, that's being trustworthy, whatever those token terms might be, getting some of that surface level information actually helps formulate the interview questions that you, as the hiring manager, are then going to bring to those potential candidates.
Okay.
Because one thing that I have noticed inside of my talent career is we don't commonly put a lot of time into preparing the questionings and the
Oh,
discussion that we're going to have with the
could
candidate.
share stories on that one. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
rather than what we're looking for.
Okay.
Resumes don't paint the picture for a person. It gives a very surface level overview, which can make or break the candidate moving forward in the pipeline or in the process.
Mm-hmm.
You need to look a little deeper, and you need to ask those deeper questions. So if you
Mm-hmm.
want to diversifying the hiring approach, it starts with engaging your existing team,
Mm-hmm.
asking them what they see as missing or opportunities within their department
Mm-hmm.
for the person that's going to be joining it, and then taking that information to craft those interview questions based on the needs of not only what you are looking for as the hiring manager, but how is this going to support the team that they're going to be integrating with moving forward. And
Okay.
that plays a huge role.
Okay. So so keep going then. So I mean, like what happens after that? And yeah, keep going.
Yeah. So once we've established the understanding of what the needs are for the position,
Mm-hmm.
then we start going into the realm of the hiring process. And there's structured interviews, there's semi-structured, there's no structured approaches entirely when it comes to recruiting. It's all inside of timeline and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
What is the timeline that you're looking to hire? Usually, if you find out today that you're needing to replace somebody, but you're not going to replace them until their last day,
Mm-hmm.
it's way too
Mm-hmm.
late. If you know that there's somebody that you're going to need to bringing in or replacing, you start sourcing that same day.
Yeah.
Reason is talent takes time. You need to
Mm-hmm.
be able to allow yourself enough time to schedule the interviews, schedule any working interviews, any skills assessments that might come in. Those are important factors that play a pivotal role in the selection process.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we've gathered our insight, we have an understanding of what we need to do in order to start hiring. Awesome. Now we've created our interview questionnaire for the questions that we're going to go through. Typically, I'd recommend that you're going through some general candidacy questions. It's icebreaker. Let's
Mm-hmm.
get comfortable. Let's get to know the candidate. Let's get them to break out of the quote unquote interview persona that they're in.
Right.
So you want them to be able to think for themselves, not just listening to respond. It's listening to understand and then respond.
Right.
And then adding in some scenario-based questions. So like, what are some challenging issues that a dental assistant in your practice is currently facing? What are
Right.
some situations that you commonly have with your patients? Bring those into the interview discussion so you can test the temperament of your candidate. How are they going to respond? How are they going to react? How are they thinking? How are they going to be strategic and doing multiple things at a time? We know our DAs in the back, they're moving, they're quick.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to move with some agility back there. So if you're gearing the conversation to that, you'll
Mm-hmm.
be able to see how agile this person actually is.
Okay.
I'm also a huge advocate for putting layers inside of the hiring approach and process.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by layers is having at least 2 or 3 interviews with the candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Your first candidate, at times, just because they show up, doesn't mean that they're the best selection for you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to stay in the conversation just as much as you want the candidates to stay in the interview conversation.
Right.
And if you add in those extra layers, meaning you're gonna sit with the office manager for the first interview, and then you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
meet with one of the treatment coordinators, or then you're gonna meet with the hygiene team, whatever the responsibility or the role specifically is.
Mm-hmm.
Building in those soft practices will help uncover ways for that candidate to not only express themselves, but also share their scope of understanding so
Mm-hmm.
that they can best support you in your role as well as your entire team overall.
Right.
So it allows for different perspectives. I've sit in a lot of interviews. Even when I'm not conducting the interviews, I will sit in on them just to hear some questions.
Mm-hmm.
It helps frame your way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then not only do you get that information more structured, you now have a templated approach that you can utilize time after time after
Sure.
time when there is a need for a new person to join your team, whether
Right.
that's through growth and expansion, or you're in one of those stagnant phases where you're needing to replace so you can grow again. And
Right.
those are, at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that you're hiring the right person, and the person that you are hiring also feels comfortable enough to be welcome, to be integrated, and to be fully supported inside of their learning
Right.
curve that they're going to experience.
Okay. So I started this episode by posing a question: should the diversity of your staff reflect the diversity of the community in which you operate? And there's no yes or no. That's case by case.
Hmm.
I didn't hear you comment on DEI, how everybody would think of it if all they did was watch the news.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about that, because is it just sort of baked into your answer, or is it not a thing? Like, help me with this. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I think about DEI and how I bring it forward, I naturally bring those conversations into my recruiting discussions.
Okay.
I'm always looking at it from the angle of EEO. We are an equal opportunity employer, so we need to make sure that we're providing those opportunities. I don't look at skin, I don't look at color, I don't look at anything other than
Okay.
skills and what is the opportunity that you have to grow within the organization.
Hmm.
And that's an important factor when you're even starting to hire, taking a time to actually understand what is the culture and the level of diversity that you're looking for, because diversity shows up in multiple things. Are you looking for diversity in the way you appear as a team, or are you looking for
Mm,
diversity in how you perform as a team? And that's where the distinctions really show up, because you can have diversity and equity and inclusion. You can rattle about it, you can talk about it. But if you're not bringing that in through how you're interviewing your candidates, skills assessments are huge for how I interview team and talent. And
mhm,
that's by putting them through behavioral assessments.
mhm,
So understanding what they do, how they think, how they speak, how they show up, how they don't show up in terms of in times of turmoil, I should say. Those are areas and avenues that will fuel how you are creating the DEI initiatives in your practice. And I think it's because DEI gets wrapped up inside of culture, and culture is a huge conduit, absolutely. But DEI shows up in so many different factors.
mhm,
You have to have psychological safety to even have diversity and inclusion represented. If
mm,
you're not focusing on creating a safe and inclusive space, how are you going to attract diverse talent? How are you going to attract individuals that want to grow within your business after you've retained them?
mhm,
So there's all of those building blocks that continue to act as building blocks.
mhm.
I think with D&I, though, there are opportunities in recruiting to make it much more outstanding in the discussion
Okay.
rather than just like a template in the job description, because
Okay.
you'll see EEO clauses
Yeah.
about, yeah, we celebrate and acknowledge everyone. That's great, but then when I look at your team, it doesn't look like you're acknowledging
Yeah. HR
celebrating
made us put
everyone.
that in, but yeah.
Yeah, so that's definitely plays a role. And also look to your patient base as the community that you're involved in. What is your community representing?
Hmm.
How are you ensuring that your team represents what the community is that you're servicing? If you're servicing underpopulated indigenous areas of the country,
Hmm.
okay, great. I probably wouldn't be rolling up to the office in a Bentley with a Birkin bag wanting
Right.
to showcase that level of class or
Yeah.
status.
Yeah.
That would matter to my patient base. What matters is, how am I giving back to my community? How am I
Hmm.
supporting? How am I leveraging my team to support my patient experience? There's so many other layers that add into the DEI that are just not the surface level things that we are commonly seeing all over social media.
No, you wouldn't even know it. In fact, you mentioned, one of the dimensions, I guess, was performance-based diversity. I was going to ask you about that, but I think that maybe the bigger question is, are there a few different dimensions of diversity that, you know, if there are, I would love for you to say what they are, so that maybe it's just my mind that's going to broaden a bit. But I like performance-based diversity. Like, what does that mean? Some people are allowed to not perform. Like, I don't know what that means. So what are the few dimensions, maybe the few more common dimensions? I'm sure there's tons of them, but a few more
Yeah.
common dimensions, and then What do you mean by performance-based diversity?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I mean by performance-based diversity and how that really shows up, and I'll use these two as an example. So diverse appearance and diverse performance.
Okay.
Appearance is exactly how it seems, meaning we have every shade of the rainbow on our team, which is
Mm-hmm.
beautiful and celebratory as that is.
Mm-hmm.
How are they actually showing up and working together? Are they
Mm-hmm.
all the same person though? So you may have the color of the rainbow, but the same skill set is all Jonathan. So they're all going to
Mm.
be heads down, they're working away, they're executing, they're doing their things. But what does it look like when they need to expand their comfort zone at that point?
Okay.
That's where we start shrinking down.
I gotcha.
That's
So
how the
how they
appearance,
perform, not the quality of their performance. Got
exact
it. Understood.
who and how they
Okay.
perform, as opposed to a beautiful rainbow team. And we have a Jonathan and we have a Carl. Our skill sets, we want to make sure are complementary and to support one another. We don't need them to be identical, because then when they're identical, we see a lot more of this rather
Yeah.
than this.
Yeah.
And we don't need people to be better than or one upping anyone. We need to be cohesive. So
Got
when
it.
we start focusing on the diversity of cohesion, we look at the performance, and it's how we're performing, how we uptrain, how we skill set, and
Mm-hmm.
then how we uptrain those areas too.
Got it. Okay. So then are those, just to restate, like, the more common categories of diversity then? So performance, what are they? I don't want to misstate anything.
Yeah, so there are a lot of different factors of diversity that get created. Those are the two that I focus on as an IO psychologist. I'm focusing not just on the appearance, I'm focusing on the performance. So those
Sure.
are my two realms that I will hone in completely, mainly because I'm focused on the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to ask another diversity consultant or somebody that's much more deeper into that world,
Mm-hmm.
they probably have some other traits and methods and approaches that have been created, but there's no right or wrong way to create diversity. I think
Got
that's
it.
the thing. There's no right or wrong way. It's all inside of how you're creating it for you. What you touched on earlier about creating missions and visions and things where we find at times finally see iterations getting created, that's the thing to remember, is you are responsible for the vision that you're creating just as much as the vision you have for the team that you're staffing and building. Nobody else can create a version of that outside of you unless you
Yeah.
allow them to. So
Right.
that's where it shows up.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Jonathan, with just a few questions, we have covered, at least to my brain, an enormous amount of ground. It's a refreshing discussion, I got to tell you, because it just sounds, I won't even compare. It just sounds rational. Not that it's necessarily easy to do, but a team that's um, diverse in how it operates, um, and how, and maybe other dimensions that are relevant, but collectively, when put together, it has to be a well-performing team. It's got to achieve the mission. And
Yeah.
within that, that's a pretty wide boundary. Within that boundary, there's a lot of, I'll say, room to play. But to get to the first, your first answer, we're talking about the hiring process itself. Got to do your homework and have a good process.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on hiring teams where you get the questions 5 minutes before. You're like, really? I mean,
Yeah.
it would have been. I mean, so we treat hiring people with the same importance as, I don't know, what's for dinner tonight, and that's just, you're going to get bad people. You might get lucky, but it's
Yeah.
luck. It's not plan.
Exactly.
So you got to really think it through. So thank you for all of that. A couple of questions, like wrap up questions, I ask every guest. The first one is, the context of what we're talking about, despite the ground we covered, is there anything you think I should have asked you, or any topic you think that we should cover that, I didn't ask that many questions, that we should cover, that we didn't cover?
Yeah. I think one area is to really dive into the fact that everybody is hiring these days. We've been hiring for the last 4 years,
Yeah.
and talent pool is more of a shallow pond at these times.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, more or less from a confidence perspective, stay in the conversation. There are people that are talented out there that are looking for opportunities. You have to be willing to give it to them, and you have to be willing to train them.
Mm-hmm.
There's no cookie cutter approach to hiring. There's no cookie cutter talent person out there.
Mm-hmm.
Got to be willing to give as much as they're willing to give into your opportunity.
Got it. And I'm curious, thought of a question. So pick a typical medical practice. Let's say it's a non-clinical job you're hiring for. Like, who should be involved in that? Should clinical people be able, like, what should that hiring team look like?
I would not include a clinical individual in that
Okay.
conversation. For instance, we were hiring a marketing manager for a plastic surgery office. The
Hmm.
only person that needed to be involved was the existing marketing manager and the office manager, since that's who they'd be reporting to.
Okay.
We didn't need to include the surgeon. We didn't need to include any of the medical assistants in the back office,
Okay.
mainly because the scope of their job was take photos. We want to make sure you know what you're taking photos of
Hmm.
and you know not to get in the way of the clinicians.
Got it. Fair enough. Okay, good. And the other question I ask is, all right, so we've caught listeners' attention. They've been, you can't avoid this topic here in December 2023. Um, but they don't know where to start. They want to get going on it in their practice, just don't know where to start. Are there one or two simple things that you could recommend they do just to get off the starting line and get going down the path of, we're going to get better at this, or we want to get better, whatever it is that they're not getting?
Yeah, absolutely. So, big thing, leverage AI for one. AI
Okay.
can be your huge conduit to areas that you do not know. uh,
Okay.
we, as office managers and leaders in practices, we're not trained on how to hire. We weren't trained on how to recruit or any of that stuff. It's a lot of learning on the job.
Okay.
And many of those cases, you have an opportunity now with ChatGPT, Jasper, all of these other open AI platforms where you can plug in, create an interview questionnaire for a new dental assistant that I'm going to be staffing for.
Hmm.
Boop, it'll create an entire questionnaire for you. Then you get to put your own sprinkle of flavor and spin it the way that's, more in line with what you need.
Yes.
But that's a huge area that you can absolutely leverage that will provide immediate results, and you can start applying that immediately.
Okay. Yeah, you
um,
really can.
the other area is LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great resource for job descriptions, evaluate other jobs that are in the market. How
Hmm.
can you say you're offering a competitive position when you're not assessing the market that you're competing in? And
Hmm.
you take the time to look at other DA positions that are posted. You get to understand not only the competition that you're working with, but what the timeline is going to potentially look like for onboarding
Yeah.
and staffing.
Yeah.
Great resources out there.
Great resource. Excellent. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Jonathan Bonanno with Cultura Co. Again, appreciate you coming on Practice Care, trying to demystify. It worked for me. Hopefully it worked for others too, but demystify this topic and help us make sense of it. Appreciate it. Really, really, really do.
Awesome. Thank you, Carl. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And you supplied a lot of contact information. So that's in the show notes for your episode. So anybody who wants to reach out to Jonathan, that's another way to do so. 2 points before we wrap up. First, if you're someone like Jonathan or us that we seek to serve private practice owners, or if you're a private practice owner yourself and you've figured out a piece of the business side of private practice that you think others would benefit from, either way, whichever profile you are, we want you to come on Practice Care and tell the world about it. In the show notes for Jonathan's episode and every episode, there's a link, couple of clicks. Tell us what's on your mind so we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. Finally, please subscribe to Practice Care. We do a new episode every week, and the easiest way to stay up to date is to subscribe, because then you'll get notifications. We're on Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon, YouTube, pretty much every player and platform. We're easy to find. Just search Practice Care, one word, and you'll find us, and then you can subscribe. Thanks very much, and until next time.